And welcome everybody to another episode of Pulse of Fins Nation. I am your host, Louis Song. Today I'm joined by Chris Early, otherwise known as Duke. I'm also joined by Alfredo Arteaga of the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast. So we've got a lot of good stuff talking about today. We're going to get into some Chris Grier talk. I briefly had a discussion with Jason Sarney on my solo show, Fins Nation. We're talking about Chris Grier because I seem to have started a little bit of a firestorm on the Twitter streets about I think that Chris Grier has handled this offseason, quite frankly, brilliantly based on what he's had to work with. Other people disagree, still look at his overall body of work and note that there has not been any playoff wins. And we're going to get into where exactly does Chris Grier rank in the echelon of NFL GMs and executives, because I'd really like to see where he relates to that. To that end, I have also invited Manny Chang, who is our producer here at the 5 Reasons Sports Network and a Philadelphia Eagles fan, to give his perspective on some very important information that I think would be very relevant to that discussion. So with all that said, we're going to get right into it. But first, we're going to talk about PricePicks.com. PricePicks.com is the revolutionary fantasy platform where you can pick up to 6 different players across professional sports leagues, whether that's the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, one of each. It is up to you to decide. Just choose whether your chosen player will get more or less than their projected stat. They give you free squares, special Taco Tuesday promos, Flex Friday specials where you can get your money back if you lose, or multiply the amount of money you can normally win. With offers like that, it's hard to justify not signing up if PricePicks is available in your area. For those of you who are inside South Florida, do not worry. I am told by Ethan Skolnick, the head of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, that PricePicks is currently working on a new game that you will soon be able to play again here in South Florida. And for those of you who are outside of South Florida, just use the promo code 5, that's FIVE. And like I said, they will match up to $100 on your deposit when you sign up. All right. So let's go ahead and we'll get right into this. The Chris Grier discussion, as I basically put it, was that for everything that the Miami Dolphins have lost this offseason, and I was pretty bitter about the whole loss of Christian Wilkins. I was utterly convinced they would re-sign him, that they would have him as an offseason priority, and Chris Grier seemed to confirm that when he said that, yeah, we're absolutely not letting him leave Miami. We're going to keep him around a long time. And I thought to myself, okay, fine, whatever. Give him a blank check. He's earned it. He's proven that he's a really, 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 really good defensive tackle. And I know that there are still some people out there who think he's going to have a massive drop back in the Las Vegas Raiders uniform. I'm not convinced. I think he's still going to be Christian Wilkins that we all know and love. And quite frankly, even though he's in Las Vegas colors, I still love Christian Wilkins. He loves football. He loves the game. He's just too fun to not enjoy. And if he ever messes with the Dolphins players, like grabbing towels from the back pocket, I'm not going to be upset about it. I'm just going to look at him as like, oh, Christian, kind of like a nostalgic thing.
He's going to be down. He's going to be down 3 touchdowns when he does that this season. So.
Oh yeah. Well, this is true. Yeah, because the Raiders are not going to be winning that many football games. But hey, he got his money. I can't knock him for it. He got paid, and he got paid big. Losing Robert Hunt hurt because they have to find a solution to that. I think that might come in the draft. I'm not 100% convinced that the guy that they need is on the roster yet. So there's still work to be done for Chris Grier, and I think that's going to come through the draft, and we can maybe see if we have some time to get into all that. But overall, from what the moves that Chris Grier has already made this offseason, bringing in Kendall Fuller, bringing in Aaron Brewer to take over for Connor Williams, and Aaron Brewer is a fantastic fit for the offensive blocking scheme that Butch Barry is putting, that Mike McDaniel loves to focus on. It's just all about the fit, all about the just overall, how do they fit into the scheme? I like the moves that they have made. And there are very few moves that I can look at and say, okay, I don't get this one. And remember, all of this is on an extreme budget where they've had to very strategically extend, restructure certain players just to be able to sign all these guys to the short contracts that they're getting. So Chris Grier does not have an entire treasure trove of picks to work with to make a flashy trade. He does not have just this Scrooge McDuck money bin to swim around in this year. He's had to be very frugal with his moves. He's had to be very strategic with who he brings in and why. And even still, we're still looking at players like Odell Beckham Jr., who is, of course, a big name. And there are a lot of people who are very split on that. But for everything that Chris Grier has done, I'm firmly in his camp. And I feel like I have been for quite some time. There are certain things where I will question him. But as far as this vitriol, this idea of this man needs to be fired immediately and he needs to be held accountable for his failures. I said it on Twitter, and if Manny shows up, I will be happy to address it then. But there are a lot of GMs out there who are really good at their job, and their teams have not exactly been Super Bowl contenders year in and year out. So, Alf, I'll go ahead and let you go first on your thoughts with the whole Chris Grier discussion. Where do you stand with him right now? And is there anything that you would be willing to criticize him for? Does anything he deserves to be criticized for? Or am I being too soft on Grier as opposed to everybody else being too hard?
Well, he deserves to be criticized for his work on the offensive line, but even then, he's the one who found, certain a few of these guys. One of them that got $100 million in the second round, and that's Robert Hunt. The way I see Chris Grier's tenure here is because people want to blame him for everything that happened in the last 50, 60 years. He really got full control over the roster in 2019. He tore it down and then built this incarnation of the Miami Dolphins. This incarnation of the Miami Dolphins has had 4 consecutive winning seasons and been to the playoffs 2 years in a row. You got to walk before you crawl. You got to crawl before you walk. They're already crawling. Now they're trying to walk and eventually try to run. I think he's done a really, really good job. And, think about what he lost this offseason and look how he sought to replace it. They lose a 2-gap defensive tackle. Okay. They changed the system to what seems to be what's going to be more of a 1-gap system. They still have Sealer. Most teams don't have 2 defensive tackle studs. It's just not what happens. It doesn't exist in the NFL. Miami had 2. That was a luxury. Okay. They're replacing Christian Wilkins now with a bunch of guys that are going to be 1-gap specialists. I thought they've done a great job getting the guys that they've gotten. Benito Jones as a 0 tech, Tier Tart as to be a 3 tech and a 1 shade. I like everything that they've done so far to replace those guys. They haven't replaced Robert Hunt yet, but you still have the draft coming up, and it seems like they have made some promises, let's just say, to some vet guards out there that are essentially just waiting around, and it seems like they're waiting around for everybody to get that money on June 2nd. Miami's going to be one of the richer teams on June 2nd. So as far as the job that he's done, he was first charged to find that franchise quarterback. They found the franchise quarterback, period. They're going to pay that franchise quarterback this summer. Once that is done, then you can judge him on how he builds the team going forward. But as far as how he's built this roster, he has a good roster. If he didn't have a good roster, you wouldn't be bitching about trying to sign all these guys in the next 2 years. And you would be bitching about losing the 2 guys that you lost. I also noticed that for the NFL media at large, now Robert Hunt is really, really, really good, and Christian Wilkins is like a top 3 defensive player in the in the NFL. But that's neither here or there. I think Chris Grier has done a really, really, really nice job of filling in the gaps where they were created, and I like the roster, and I think this roster is going to bear the fruit. That's going to prove once again that it's a good roster by winning probably another 11 games this year.
Duke.
Well, my question about the general manager will be, what would you want instead? I think the only thing that has really kept Chris Grier from being in the upper echelon is just he doesn't have the playoff wins. If Miami had won the division this year, won a playoff game, I don't think people would be complaining about Chris Grier as much. I think that's it. It's just he doesn't have the wins to go to the playoff wins. But otherwise, I thought he's done a pretty good job. Like Alf said, Christian Wilkins went from being a good player to this elite player making a ton of money. Robert Hunt went from being a good player to a great player making $100 million. By the way, the Carolina Panthers, they re-signed Derek Brown, who has like less than 10 career sacks, I believe, to a big deal. Between him, Damian Lewis, and Robert Hunt, they've spent $250 million on those 3 players, on interior players of the contract. Robert Hunt got $100 million. Damian Lewis got $53 million, and Derek Brown got $96 million. So, Yeah, $250 million on 3 interior players. Imagine if that was Chris Grier doing that. Meanwhile, he signs Kendall Fuller, who is an equivalent player to X, who was I think he was kind of on his way out, so to speak. I mean, I think his career is kind of winding down. But
yeah, for sure.
Kinda,
by the way, just to interject, Duke, I wouldn't call Kendall Fuller an equivalent because Kendall Fuller has loads more versatility than X ever had.
Well, I think at their peak, X was a better player, but as of right now, I would say they're equivalent players. I think X is maybe a better outside corner, but I think Fuller has that versatility to play inside as well. Excuse me, but again, I think Chris Grier has done a good job with what he's been dealt with, and I know people were kind of upset about losing those players, but I don't. I don't think he's done poorly.
Duke, your beard is drawing comparisons to the bearded wonder.
Hey, well, at least it's that's a good comparison to make. So, I will go ahead and say Ryan Fitzpatrick does not have a lot of arm strength, but his arm will look like Josh Allen compared to mine. So, I had to pick the kids up today after I got off work, and they were at the school with my wife doing something, and they were in the gym playing, and I threw a football, and my arm will be sore tomorrow from that one throw. So that's what happens when you get my age. But yeah, back to Chris Grier. I think he's done a good job for what he's. Yeah, I think Chris Grier's done a good job with what the hand he's been dealt, and you've got to position yourself to sign the players you need to sign at more critical positions. I would not want to give up Jalen Phillips or Jalen Waddle because we had to sign Robert Hunt to a big deal. Same thing with Christian Wilkins. I'm a big believer in positional value, and I think that those positions have much higher positional value than the ones that we let walk. And those are the guys I think will be signed to big term deals next. That's not counting Tua, of course. So, yeah, I mean, I think Chris Grier is navigating this about as well as possible. Now, I know Alf said on a show, I think sometime during the season, that if Miami wanted to bring everybody back, they could have. They could have pulled all the levers and brought everybody back and run this thing back. But at the same time, that probably means a complete and total teardown in a couple of years. And so I think what they're doing is trying to expand their competitive window without being overly detrimental with losing key players here and there. So, like I said, I think he's doing well.
So that's basically been my thoughts on the whole thing. Now, you talked about the playoff wins. That's something that I feel like we can't summarily just say, oh, Chris Grier is the reason Miami hasn't won the playoffs. That's obviously, it's too narrow-minded. And I feel like even people who are calling for Grier, they're not saying it's only Grier. These people are saying that it's the whole thing. It's Stephen Ross. It's Chris Grier. It's Mike McDaniel. It was Brian Flores. It was everybody. It's Tua. It's like the whole thing is rotten from the core down. And yeah, I know it's wrong. It's wrong. It's subjectively it's wrong.
By the way,
my point.
Go ahead, Alf.
Yeah, let me interject one thing. Remember that Chris Grier just got onto the competition committee? Okay, and this will make the first time, and I believe the last guy that was on the competition committee, because I don't think Jimmy Johnson was on there. Nick Saban tried to get on there and couldn't because he didn't have the tenure. I think the last guy that was on the competition committee was almost 30 years ago, maybe 28 years ago, Don Shula. Okay. If you don't think that buys Chris Grier time, then I don't know what you're thinking. And if you don't think that those guys are vetted to be onto the competition committee, then, I don't know what to say. But Chris Grier is here for the long haul. He'll be here for a while. It's going to take something calamitous for him to not keep this job.
It would take a scandal. But Duke, what were you going to say?
My point with the playoff wins is not that he's the reason that they haven't won the playoff wins. I just think that if Miami had a couple playoff wins, or at least one playoff win, that there would not be the we need to get rid of Chris Grier kind of idea. But it goes back to all that. It goes back to my original question. What is it that people want? What GM out there do they want that would be light years ahead of what Chris Grier is doing? And if you're comparing, like, well, look at Veach in Kansas City, and he got Patrick Mahomes. Well, having a quarterback like that is going to solve a lot of problems. But you turn around and look at Buffalo. Since we had the show last, Buffalo just traded their number one target in Stephon Diggs to the Texans, and now who knows what they're going to do? They've had to do a lot of make some pinch some pennies on that roster to get under the cap and make some moves. So, a lot of fans are thinking maybe their window has closed. So it could be, and they made the AFC title game a few years ago, but they're not significantly closer to a Super Bowl win than the Dolphins. And at this point, if you look at the rosters as of today, you'd have to argue that maybe the Dolphins have the best roster in the division. So, again, I don't know what fans or people want with Chris Grier that he's lacking.
Offensive line scouting ability, I guess. That's the only thing that I can think of, really. And Al already brought it up earlier. Is that and aside from Robert Hunt?
Well, you look at the offensive line. Look at the offensive line across the league. I mean, how many teams are just signing these great offensive linemen or drafting these great offensive linemen? The college game just doesn't allow for that anymore. These guys don't come into the league pro ready like Jake Long was. Laramie Tunsil was probably the best tackle that's come out in several years. And, Chris Grier turned him into a treasure trove of picks. So, a lot of people will look at like what New England did. Well, New England had Dante Scarnecchia for 20 plus years as their offensive line coach. Miami hasn't had a consecutive offensive line coach in nearly a decade. This is the first time they've had that in a long time. So I'm going to put my trust in Barry and McDaniel, and if they know what they're looking for in the offensive line and they can get what they need, either from the players that they currently have or whoever they're going to acquire, and they're going to make it work because of that continuity. So we brought Kendall Lamb back. That's a good addition. And it wasn't for like massive money either. So again, Chris Grier's putting in good work. I can't complain.
So let's talk about this real quick, because Alf, you had mentioned that there are some veteran guards that promises have been made to. Now, I don't know if you have inside knowledge, and I wouldn't ask you to divulge it, but I can at very least speculate and kind of get an idea of who these people might actually be. So one name that comes to mind, obviously, immediately, Laken Tomlinson, who was cut from the Jets. And I'm pretty sure what was the cutoff for the compensatory formula being messed up? Not that Tomlinson counts for it anyway, but what was that cutoff date?
Well, it doesn't matter anymore because those guys were all cut. All these guys that are available, they were all cut, so they're not going to count against the compensatory formula.
Right.
So it's what's been rumored is that Dalton Risner, was essentially told, hey, hold on and wait till after the draft, and maybe we will revisit this. So my guess is that it's probably Dalton Risner and Laken Tomlinson. Nobody really knows, by the way. The only people that really know are their agents. It's interesting enough, though, that Dalton Risner fired his agent and hired Drew Rosenhaus right before that rumor came off.
And that's basically a go to Miami free card.
Yeah. So my guess is that they're waiting around to see what happens in the draft before they move on one of these guys.
So now here's my next question then. So right now, as it stands, Teron Armstead, your left tackle. Aaron Brewer, obviously your center. They brought him in from Tennessee for a reason. Austin Jackson, your right tackle. Now, I'm going to pull up the Dolphins roster here. They re-signed Isaiah Wynn. I sincerely doubt that they're going to look at Isaiah Wynn and say, yeah, he's the starting left guard just by default. I refuse to believe that that's what they're aiming for here.
No, I think he will have to compete to earn that job.
as he should,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
he
and I think at
definitely-
right guard, Eichenberg and Jack Driscoll are probably the leaders there. And I know people are going to say, "Hey, but you brought back Robert Jones." Yeah, I understand that. I still believe that they look at Robert Jones as a depth piece.
as they should. I get it, but Robert Jones is he's not a super athlete. Like, you need hyper athletic kind of offensive line guys to be able to run this offensive line scheme that Mike McDaniel has. These bulldozers that are on the roster, like Lester Cotton, like, he can bulldoze, but don't ask him to go into the second level of the secondary. It's just not going to work. So you get Isaiah Wynn back, and athletic when he's healthy, and otherwise not. Robert Jones, Chasen Hines, Liam Eichenberg. Again, the Eichenberg experiment, I'm done with. He's Jesse Davis 2.0 at this point. But aside from that, Miami doesn't really have a whole lot going there. They have Kendall Lamb, Keon Smith, Ryan Hayes. They're all pure tackles. The interior of the offensive line is very much in flux still at this point. So if I'm the Miami Dolphins, if you're looking at Laken Tomlinson and you're looking at Dalton Risner, refresh my memory. Do those two play left guard or right guard? I can't remember. I think
Left guard. Left guard.
Both
yeah,
of them are left guard.
Yeah.
So that would leave right guard wide open for a draft pick of some kind. I have still remained to be in the Graham Barton camp. I would be very happy to bring him in. Or at the very least, I suspect that Jackson Powers Johnson is going to fall the same way that Creed Humphrey did. I do these mock draft simulations all the time, and I try to use different simulators to try to get a different experience, because there's not one simulator out there that's going to be just obviously set in stone. Nobody can see the future completely, but everybody has a different big board. And depending on where you go, Jackson Powers Johnson is either a consensus first round pick, or he could potentially even fall all the way to 55 to Miami. I feel like if Creed Humphrey fell all the way to the 60s, and Creed Humphrey had himself a fantastic pedigree, he was he looked like he was going to be a first round pick in and of himself. There were, correct me if I'm wrong, there were no character concerns, there were no injury concerns when it came to Creed Humphrey. Am I correct in that thinking?
Creed Humphrey was a much, much, much cleaner prospect than JPJ,
and even then,
and it's not particularly close. Remember, for Powers Johnson, you got basically 1 year at center, and you have his history at guard. There's talk of his injury history as well. Creed Humphrey, the only problem Creed Humphrey had was on tape. You could see him loaf a little bit and not finish plays, stop playing before the whistle blew, some perceived laziness, stuff like that. But that's all stuff that you figured you could fix if you got him into the pros. I was shocked that Creed Humphrey made it as far as he did. I really did, But, it's some people get it in their head what they want as far as a center, what they want that center to be. And, the Chiefs did the smart thing. They just hung around, and I believe it was 63 where they took him. At 63, they just said, look, this is BPA. We're going to take BPA, and we're going to see where it leads us. It was, I believe, 1 week in camp, and they gave him the starting job. They said, this is the starter at center. So, sometimes the simplest answer is the correct one. So, yeah, I would not surprise me one bit to see JPJ drop into the second round. That's a fact.
And Anthony Manzano talking about with Jackson Powers Johnson, the reason why our fan base wants him is because they see that a lot of scouts are saying he's going to be the next Jason Kelsey. Or Jason. Okay, not Jason. Jason Kelsey. Okay,
he could not be farther from what Jason Kelsey is. Jason Kelsey is more Aaron Brewer than Jackson Powers Johnson. Jackson Powers Johnson is a Mack truck playing center. Okay. Yeah, some athleticism.
Alex Mack?
Kind of, but more like that guy that played for the Raiders a couple years back. I forget his name. But he's more of a powerful guy. And it wouldn't surprise me one bit if Jackson Powers Johnson, and by the way, I could tell a lot of people really haven't watched them all too much. he has his own snapping issues. Like that's a thing.
God, he's guaranteed to be a Dolphin then.
Okay. Jackson Powers Johnson is very likely that you draft him and he sticks as a guard for his career.
I'm good with that. Right guard, boom, plug and play, done.
And he could play. Yeah, he could play a right guard. Like that's not a problem. Now is he a perfect fit? No. For Miami's offense, no. But does he allow you to do more things in your offense? Yes. He brings in some of those lead plays that they couldn't get to last year.
But he doesn't lumber
to with Robert Hunt.
But he doesn't lumber, Alf. He's got some athleticism to him.
Yeah, he has some athleticism, but he's mostly strong. He's a brute. He's a good player. But can he drop? Yeah, he's precisely the kind of player that does drop. But then you're going to be faced with other questions too. Like at 55, let's say Christian Haynes is there. I know for a fact Christian Haynes can hold down a guard spot for a long time, and he's really, really good as far as a pass protector. His anchor is as good as I've seen I've been watching prospects for a very long time. His anchor is noticeable. Like he does not get moved off of he's 1-2 hitch, 1-2 on his kick. He sets, puts his hands out there, and guys just don't get past him. And he's really good at steering guys with his hands. So, if you want to make Tua happy, man, I don't see how you make him happier with somebody like Christian Haynes, man. He's ready-made.
To Johnny B. Good's point, Tyler Lindenbaum did not fall in the draft.
No, but he was more of an ideal prospect, He had it all. He had what Creed Humphrey didn't have. Remember, Creed Humphrey was also a bad body guy, and scouts, for whatever you might say, sometimes they look at him and they're like, these are not guys that we want to draft necessarily too high, especially to play center. We want a guy who's a little bit more put together, a little bit more trim, a little bit more, adept to the NFL, meaning no fat guys allowed.
Like you have to be that has to be all muscle. It can't be bulk.
Yeah, you can't be, you can't look like what Creed Humphrey looked like at one point and then, get drafted high. And teams just, after a while, teams just do the dumb thing. They look at their team and they say, look, we're happy with our center. We'll just pass here. Even though I am certain that for Creed Humphrey to get taken 63, that there must have been 20 teams that on their board had him as BPA, but they looked at their roster and they said, oh, we have a center, so we'll just pass on him right here. And sure enough, it was the Chiefs that got lucky.
The Chiefs always seem to get the guy they need somehow. But in any case, so another question that I guess we're talking draft today because that's where the discussion is going in the chat. So this is what the Pulse is saying. So Anthony Manzano again, Duke, I'll ask you this one: who would be a realistic trade partner, either going up or going down in the 2024 draft? For the record, before you even answer, I do not want to trade up for anybody at this point. Like I have even experimented in my mock drafts the idea of just trading out of the first round altogether and accumulating as many mid-round picks as humanly possible, because I feel like early in the second round, there are a lot of guys that would be available that are basically borderline first rounders anyway.
So it depends really on who's available and what you could get. A realistic, I think PFF had a fairly realistic trade. Miami goes from 21 to 25 with Green Bay. Green Bay comes up to get Cooper DeJean. Miami gets a 4th or 5th round pick and a 2025 third to move down 4 spots. That may be kind of the best that they could get. If there's a quarterback that's available, and there's not really anybody behind Miami that wants a quarterback, but maybe somebody early in the second wants to come up, and Minnesota doesn't get one. They have pick 23. That's a pick that you could look at. But realistically, it really just depends on who's available. I think probably the best case scenario for Miami to move down will be if there's a few edge rushers available and some teams that need an edge rusher like Buffalo. Somebody down in that kind of late first, They want to come up and get a guy. I could see that. Maybe there's an offensive line prospect that Miami doesn't want, but somebody later on wants. I mean, maybe San Francisco's super duper high on Graham Barton and Miami's not so much, and they will take pick 31 and get a haul for that. So realistically, I mean, you're not looking, unless you just want to trade all the way out of the first round and accumulate some 2025 draft capital. Probably realistically, you're looking at 4 to 7 spots at most. So I don't have the draft pulled up in front of me. Whoever those people are, that's your realistic options. And you're probably getting, I mean, in 2020, Miami moved from 26 to 30 and got a 4th. So that's kind of you're getting. If Miami moves from 21 to 25, 26, somewhere that range, you're getting probably a late 3rd or a 4th rounder.
Yeah, I'm looking at this, and realistically, there's nobody behind Miami in the first round that needs a quarterback. So if that quarterback drops, the only team is Minnesota, right? But Minnesota's going to take their quarterback at 11. I don't see how they're going to wait to 23 to take a guy. So it's going to take somebody that wants a quarterback that's dropping, and they're going to jump in front of Minnesota. If Minnesota doesn't take one at 11, which I don't think that's going to happen. So who is that guy? Who is that team? And I just don't see it. So
Oakland, or excuse me, Las Vegas. That would be trading all the way out of the first round. But
Las Vegas is,
they would be pick 44 or 45, I believe.
They are pick 44. That's the only one I can see. Yeah. And man, what are they going to have to give up for pick 20 to move up that many spots? To move up 23 spots, they're going to have to give up 44. They're going to probably have to give up 44 and a first rounder next year, plus a 3rd rounder this year.
Yeah, I would take that.
Well, if I'm Miami, I'll take that. I'm dead serious.
Which means that Miami will have 2 first-round picks next year.
Yeah.
And Chris Grier loves that. He loves doubling up. Now,
as far as the other part of that question, it depends on who falls where for a trade up. I'm not going far up in the draft. I don't care who's available. I says I'm trading up for those top 3 if they fall out of the top 10. If Marvin Harrison Jr. has a video that comes out of him smoking weed out of a gas mask, and he falls to say 12 or 13 again, yeah, I would think about that. But I don't think those guys are going to fall. The guy that I'm looking at, this week I've been watching the combine. I didn't get to watch it when it happened, so I've been kind of watching it. The guy that I absolutely love as far as movement skills that I think would be a perfect fit on the Dolphins is Troy Fautanu. Just about every mock that I've seen and every simulation I've run has him going somewhere in the mid-teens. Somewhere around 14 to 17. Now,
I have had several mocks. I've had several mocks, Duke, where I'm able to pick Troy Fautanu. He's just there, just sitting there at 21. So I don't think it's impossible.
If he falls somewhere to that 17, 18 range and Miami really wants him, I think you could move up with a minimal, give up a future 4th or something like that to get into that spot. But I'm not trading up really any further than, say, 18 or 19. It's just the cost is too much, and Miami needs draft capital for this year and next year. So I just don't see it. Now, if somebody falls that should not fall, and they're there and you want to get them, I could see it. But I'm all for trading back and getting more draft capital, not giving up draft capital to get one player.
Yeah, I'm not looking to get. There's no player in this draft that I like enough to basically justify getting rid of your whole draft class at this point. Now, Anthony Manzano talking about if Brock Bowers fell out of the top 10 because of the quarterbacks, he'd trade up to around 13 or 14. I feel like Miami, at least, feels like their tight end position is covered for the most part. They'll probably use a later round pick on a guy like Tip Raymond, I guess. That's a name that gets floated around a lot. But
well, I saw today that They had a 30 visit with Eric All. So I don't know much about him as a prospect, but he's a later round guy. Didn't he play for Michigan and then transferred?
Yeah, I believe he's at Iowa right now.
Okay. He was at
Also,
Iowa.
Chad would know a lot about him.
Yeah, I mean, moving from 21 to 14, I don't know what that cost is. The development really, as far as the draft goes this week, is bad for the player. It could possibly be good for Miami. And that was Devondre Sweat. His arrest or issue with the DWI, he could fall to 55 and possibly past that. And so let's say he falls past 55, and Miami doesn't have a pick again until 158, I believe. Let's say you get in that mid third round, late third round, and Devondre Sweat is still there because people have concerns. I would absolutely trade up trade a third and a potential player or whatever, and another pick to move in back into the third round and get that guy. And Miami is expected to have 3 threes next year, so you can give up one. That's a guy that I think could fall, and Miami could possibly move back into one of those zones to get. But I don't think he would have been there had it not been for this DWI. So I know the teams will do their due diligence on that. But, man, you talk about a guy that's, if you look at Baltimore snap counts, and Matabuke played the most of any defensive lineman, and Michael Pierce was second, played about 55% of the snaps. They need a guy that can be a really good kind of middle guy, 0 tech, 1 tech, and you get Devondre Sweat out of him there. Yeah, that's going to be a nasty defensive front with Zach Sealer there. So we'll see. But that's a potential guy I would trade up for in the later rounds. I don't know that I'm willing to move in the first round.
Well, my mindset with Miami is that you can't wait for the third and the fourth rounds to just pass you by. You've got to get a pick somewhere somehow. There's just too much talent that you're just gonna let fall away that way. So you either need to absolutely nail your first and second round pick and then pray that somebody falls that's really, really good. Or
remember that picks always depreciate by a round. So, if you want a second rounder this year, you got to trade a first rounder from next year, right? The Dolphins are going to have 3 third rounders. They can easily get into that fourth round. Like, that's not going to be a problem. If they want to get into the fourth round, they could trade one of those third rounders from next year, and they'll get into the fourth round this year. So I don't think that's going to be a problem, because remember that when you want to trade down, you need a partner, and there has to be a reason why somebody's going to want 21. The more I look at it, like, what's the reason? It's going to have to be one of those wide receivers. It's going to have to be one of those edge rushers.
Alf. Okay. I did a mock on a very trade happy website. I think it's Mock Draft Database or something. I've never used it as a serious simulator just because of how trade itchy that algorithm seems to be. But with that said, Buffalo now has no number 1 wide receiver, like, at all. Would you be willing to trade with Buffalo if they came in with a bunch of picks and say, we want your wide receiver, don't pick him, here's a bunch of our stuff?
Well, here's the thing. It's going to take knowing your board really, really well and knowing what is it that they want. And maybe your board and you think that what they're going to take is not good for them, and it's a gamble, but teams have done it before, Yeah. New England did it to Miami one time. I think we talked about this on the podcast. Now, both guys ended up becoming really good players. One was a little bit better than the other. Miami ended up taking Vernon Carey, but New England threatened Miami with, look, we're going to have Vernon Carey, so you're going to have to give us something. Miami ended up giving up like a third round pick just to move up one spot to take Vernon Carey, and then they took Vince Wilfork, But at the time, Miami didn't need a nose tackle. They didn't care about having a nose tackle because they kept having good ones on 1-year deals like Keith Traylor and Larry Chester, so that don't really matter. So maybe you know something about, you know, your board and their board, and you don't necessarily think you're going to get hurt. But I don't foresee Buffalo unloading a bunch of picks, you know, because that's a serious move up. It's like 8 spots in the first round. Like, you get a second round at least.
Xavier Worthy's flying up the draft boards.
I never understood this concept, though. People flying up and down draft boards, like nothing's really happening. You know, once you have all the pro days done, that's it. That's the draft board. You know, now you can have something like what happened with Sweat, you know, and that could move him down. But other than that, I don't know why guys are moving up and down, because the intelligence from all the people that actually are in this business of like Daniel Jeremiah, you know, the guys that cover the draft and do their mock boards, Mel Kiper, all their intelligence is already in the barn. Like, they've already talked to as many GMs as they're going to talk to, and they already have a pretty good idea of who likes who. You know, I always looked at Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft, like especially his last one, and that kind of tells you where most of it is going, because they don't tend to lie to him too much.
And I heard a guy say one time that at this point in the draft process, if a guy is flying up draft boards, all that means is the media is catching up to what the NFL already has. So if Xavier Worthy's flying up draft boards, that means he was already up there. We're just now finding out about it. So to go back to your question about Buffalo, if you think that's who they want and that's who you think they're going to take, do you want to defend that guy for the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a problem.
That's the question you have for Buffalo. So now let's say Arizona wants him really bad. Let's say they trade out of 4 and don't get the receiver they want, or they take something else and they want Xavier Worthy. Well, I wouldn't worry about Arizona, because they're out of conference. You play them once every 4 years, maybe once every 3 years at most. I'm not worried about them. Do you want to play Xavier Worthy twice a year for the next decade? If you think that's where Buffalo is going. Now, if you think Buffalo is going to take another receiver that you're not even remotely worried about, sure, I'll take the pick from them and whatever else they offer. But if I think they're going to take somebody that I would not want to deal with, I wouldn't make the deal. It's like the whole interdivisional trading. Like, if a team trades you a player within the division, they're not that good, or you're not worried about them. I mean, we traded Devontae Parker to the Patriots for a third. And Patriots fans were excited about that. I'm like, you realize what just happened? We took a guy that we're not like, yeah, you have him. We're not worried about defending him for the next however long. And you know what happened to that third round pick?
Devon
I can't recall. There you
go. Nope. That
pick
was traded. That pick was traded along with Hunter Long for Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah, that's right.
So Chris Grier turned Devontae Parker into Jalen Ramsey. I mean, just go ahead and drop the mic there.
Ooh, I don't even need to come on.
Okay. And with that, I officially introduced Manny Chang to the show. Manny, how are you today, sir?
Evening, guys. Sorry, I just got home from work. Traffic was horrible on 95.
No, I get it.
Earl, it's so funny you say that. The Eagles traded Donovan McNabb to the Washington Redskins, and the Redskins they thought they finally had a quarterback to take them to the Super Bowl. We all know. I
was thinking about that when I was talking about that, because I remember that was a very high profile one, but I knew you would have more information on that, so I didn't want to get into that.
Maybe the Deshaun Jackson. Wait, was Deshaun Jackson traded from the Eagles? No, I think Deshaun, he didn't sign, I think, and then I think Washington ended up signing him. But yeah, that Donovan McNabb thing, division thing. Normally, the team that does a trade, there's a reason for that. There's always a reason for that. So.
Yeah, and sometimes there's a trade that you don't make that ends up blowing up in your face. Miami, in my opinion, has one of the worst in history, which was, forget about Drew Brees and all of that stuff. They had a trade in place to get Matt Hasselbeck, okay, for a second round pick, and that was the infamous, what can Matt Hasselbeck do that Jay Fiedler can't? And then in free agency, Trent Green wanted to come to Miami, and that was after Trent Green had thrown for 4,000 yards for the Chiefs. He was one of the best quarterbacks in football, and they once had poo-pooed that as well. I'm thinking those teams would have had those quarterbacks. I think they're Super Bowl contenders.
It's always the move that you don't make, which, again, right now, Miami is about to not make a move and get rid of Tua, not make the move. Do not make the move for getting rid of Tua, and that's going to help them out in the long run, I think. Now, Manny, I brought you on because I wanted you to give your perspective on your GM, because we were talking about Chris Grier and where does he rank in the echelon of GMs, and I was talking about we discussed it over the phone not too long ago, but I wanted to get it out in public.
Funny that now you want me to say this on air.
I feel like that the perspective is needed, because there are a lot of people who are looking at Chris Grier and saying that, you know what, he's not that great, he's not that good. And I even said it's like there are a lot of good GMs, really good GMs out there who their teams have not lived up to the expectations of their fan base. And so, in your perspective, Howie Roseman, who's been the GM there for since 2010, he's been listed as the GM, I believe.
Correct.
He had success. He won a Super Bowl. And then the Eagles fell back again. And then he had to try to fix it. And he couldn't fix it because they were still losing. And they lost a bunch of wild cards. There wasn't any playoff wins for a long time. And I'm sure that there were people screaming for heads to roll, but there's got to be a reason for why he's managed to stay in his job for so long. And I don't think it's blackmail.
Correct. So I'll make this not as long as I did on the phone with you on Sunday. I think, listen, we all know that winning cures all. But I think when you have a GM that consistently does things differently every single year, when the goal is to win the Super Bowl and you don't, you expect things to shake up. You expect things to, changes to be made. However, sometimes the changes that a fan wants is not the one that gets made. But I think if you're a Miami Dolphins fan, and I said this to you, Louis, it's been a long time since this team has had any consistent winning. Now, whether one fan wants to say, well, consistent winning to me is making the playoffs. Another fan might tell you, well, consistent winning to me is just, I don't know, making at least a conference title game. Everybody's level of expectations, whoever you're a fan of, is different. I'm satisfied with Howie Roseman because of the way that he had to learn, not to mention got stripped of his job due to Chip Kelly signing, right? He had to learn under him. He was basically the scapegoat for everything. And after a while, then our owner realized, you know what, let me give him the keys again. So before he was Howie Roseman himself, yes, because people want to go back and say, well, he signed the dream team. Remember that dream team? Cullen Jenkins, Vince Young, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody thought that team was going to be one of the greatest teams, and we all know that.
Nnamdi Asomugha.
Nnamdi Asomugha. Thank you. Oh, damn, Earl, why are you going to make me think about number 24? Listen, by the way, if you're wearing number 24 in Philly, you might not survive. That guy and Mr. freaking Bradbury. All these GMs got to go through their own wave, right? You got to hit the ground. You got to learn from your mistakes. You got to come up. I think Chris Grier, just because he's not that flashy guy, but people want to say, well, look at Howie Roseman. Well, if you talk to an Eagles fan, just because you sometimes go out there and make a splash trade, it doesn't always work. Louis, I said it to you. We missed out on Justin Jefferson. We missed out on DK Metcalf. We missed out on Earl Thomas. All those guys were under Howie Roseman, right? Danny Watkins and the other names, which I'm not going to go after. But what do you do after to correct those mistakes to make your football team better? You go out and you make a sign and trade with A.J. Brown, right? And then all of a sudden you have a first-round pick to go and get a Jalen Carter. Like, those things just don't happen by you winning. You sometimes have to get to the ground up before you can learn a little bit and go after that. Now, what didn't help you guys in Miami Dolphins world, Tom Brady came around. And then unfortunately, Tom Brady won what he won with Bill Belichick, and that team is in your division. So I can understand the suspect, the questioning, and all this other stuff. But when it comes to Chris Grier, and I think, Alf, you said it best, all that trading and whatever the case was, that pick became Jalen Ramsey. There is a set of, I guess, how can I say it? There's a goal here. Yes, the goal is to win the Super Bowl, but the goal is to keep this consistent. To not let it be 2 or 3 years where you make the playoffs and you drown. Is to make the playoffs 2 or 3 years, but battle it consistently and trying to win the Super Bowl. Because the only GM right now, guys, in all honesty, in the last couple of years that deserves any praises is the guy in Kansas City. Let's be honest here. Because he's won the Super Bowl in the last 2 years. So just because this football team, and I get it, Dolphins fans want that playoff win. They want that conference title game. They want that experience, and I get it. I understand it. Like I know so many Dolphin fans that don't even know how it feels like to wait 2 weeks for the Super Bowl, and I've been through it 3 times. But you gotta let Chris Grier finish this. You gotta let him fight it out. He drafted his quarterback. However you want to say that the head coach at charge didn't trust in him, he's still there. That defense is still damn pretty good. Yes, you're not going to be, every single position is not going to be 5-star. But at the end of the day, have you seen what Buffalo's been through, even though with Josh Allen, and yet they haven't won anything, right? And look at New England. People thought that, Tom Brady leaving, Bill Belichick was still going to draft the quarterback of the century. They haven't won either. Do you want to be the New York Jets? Oh, but the New York Jets have made it to 2 straight conference title games. They didn't win the Super Bowl. So with this notion that Chris Grier should be fired, you got to let this man just continue to do what he's doing. He's improving the team. And the people that think that he's not improving the team, again, they're fans, but you got to just look into a much broader perspective sometimes. And this is not an easy thing. So
Hussam is making the making the contention now.
So I will say this: winning the Super Bowl in 2017 did make a lot of Eagles fans, including myself, say, "Okay, Howie Roseman has room, not to fail, but has room to grow. I guess has room to figure it out." Right, because the Cardinals said one situation was happening and all this other stuff. After 2 or 3 years, it was like, what winning one Super Bowl shouldn't be the goal anymore. That's been done, right? You haven't won one since what was it, 1933? Because I don't count NFL championships. And it's like, no, like you still have the Cowboys with 5, you still have the Giants that won 2 earlier, and then you still have the Washington Redskins, as pitiful as they've been, have 3 Super Bowls. The goal shouldn't be win 1 Super Bowl. He figured it out, right? He went out there and he made some ballsy moves. Yeah, some Eagles fans didn't like it. Listen, for the first time, he went out and signed a running back. That's not like him, right? That's not like Howie Roseman going out there giving that running back that type of money. We haven't had a running back of that caliber since LaShawn McCoy, right? And then some Eagles fans, Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders is not Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley's injured. See, now that's when you start getting picky. Right? That's when you start drawing straws and trying to make however you believe it to be satisfying to you, because you want to say, no, listen, there's only so many of these jobs. Chris Grier right now, listen, again, Kansas City's GM is the only one that should be praised right now. That is it. Okay? Because people said that Patrick Mahomes couldn't win a Super Bowl without having wideouts. And I'm sorry. That man has proven everybody wrong, right? So this team is still highly touted and highly gifted and highly talented. So you got to let this man just finish. Okay. But I mean, finish. Let's see what he saw in, the players that get drafted, the offseason players that came in, the new coaches on defense. Like, those are things that you got to just let it play out. You can't just say, fire him because he hasn't made the ballsy moves that others have made. And again, only one team wins the Super Bowl, right? So come on.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing about Howie Roseman and the Eagles. If you go on Spotrac and you look at how he's built the team to essentially create an incarnation of the team for 2 years, and then you have cap space. So
correct. We don't push those strong positions out that contribute so much money. He's like, we missed out on wide receivers. I'm going to build an offensive line. Screw it. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to build a badass offensive line that can run the football, right? That can control the clock. And my quarterback is not Tom Brady, but I'm going to make sure that he has the best possible guys in front of him to succeed. And I feel like Chris Grier, as bad as that offensive line has been, listen, we all know that, I believe his name was Connor Williams. That offense was pretty good until he got hurt. Like, those are injuries. Those are part of the game, but you can't give Chris Grier credit for that. Right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you one thing that Howie Roseman did that's really, really smart. That Jalen Hurts contract, when he gave it, 5 years, $255 million. And when everybody said, oh, my God, you're going to give $50 million to Tua. Look at the way the Eagles structured that contract. Because I look at that contract.
This year or something.
This year, his cap hit for this year is $13,558,800, right? But he will earn a base salary of $1.125 million this year with a signing bonus of $38,875,000. So you can only do that if you have a rich owner. What's a rich owner that we know of here, close by?
Yeah, just
Stephen Ross.
The Stephen Ross who just loves to spend money.
So I'm pretty sure that this breakdown of this roster, of this contract that they gave Jalen Hurts, is probably going to be the framework that they go forward on a deal for Tua Tagovailoa this summer.
And these are the type of comments that kill me. Mahomes won because that defense kept them in the game. Mahomes wasn't doing anything until the Niners fumbled the punt. Let's ignore the context, bro.
Those people just look at it from when it ended. You know what I mean? Because they say,
look at
he
highlights,
won,
and they don't look at 60 minutes. That's the problem.
Yeah, they're looking at it and say, his offense wasn't that good and his defense was great. He had the number one defense, so therefore the defense, helped him win. I suggest you go look that game against Miami. That was a mess. Okay, nobody played good in that day. That was just the
you were
Chiefs.
Still in it. You were still in the game, Alf. You needed a touchdown.
Chiefs. The Chiefs were basically just outlasted Miami that day. But go look at that Bills game and go look at the way that Mahomes played in that game against the Bills. He beat the Bills by himself in that game.
Right. Like
I will say that
Kelsey on the pylon, like there's no other quarterback right now that makes that.
One of the things that you mentioned with Howie Roseman, and one of the things that I think that's positive about Ross and Grier is that Ross has backed Grier and stayed with him. And you were mentioning some of the moves they made. I remember the 2020 draft, and I remember watching some of the reaction videos of all the Eagles fans who wanted CeeDee Lamb. And then the Cowboys got him, and they were like, "Oh, what in the world?" And freaking out. And then they drafted Jalen Reagor instead of Justin Jefferson. And I know that hits a sore spot. But if Chris Grier does that, fans are calling for his head.
Yeah,
and it's just he had.
But then what happened the next year, Earl? He went out and he traded for AJ Brown. Somehow, some way, he came up with a plan and said, "I screwed up here. No matter how the season ends, I'm going to look forward. I'm going to figure something out because guess what? I screwed in that position."
It doesn't with Grier. To me, with Grier, it does not matter how many Jalen Waddles he drafts. He'll be remembered for every Noah Igbenogany. So it's like, well, he shouldn't have drafted that. We should have drafted this guy and that guy. I think it's just this fan mentality of the GM has to be perfect. And that's why I mentioned early in the show that if Chris Grier let's say the Dolphins go out and win a Super Bowl this year, that buys Chris Grier all the leeway because Howie Roseman can do that. So, well, he messed that one draft pick up, but he's done other good things. I think Dolphins fans just overlook any good thing Chris Grier does in lieu of looking at the bad things. And I think it's just a fan base mentality. I mean, this is a hammered fan base that they can't deal with. They want something positive, and every time something positive seems to happen, there's always a negative, and they just tend to focus on that negative. And I think once that something positive happens, let's say they make the AFC Championship game, haven't been there since 1993. Let's say they make the AFC Championship game, win or lose. I think Chris Grier gets that time bought that other GMs like Howie Roseman have because they've had that success, and the Dolphins just have not had that success. And as Alf pointed out, he's really only had the reins himself since 2019. Before it was Mike Tannenbaum as the executive vice president, and then it was Dennis Hickey and Jeff Ireland. So all these guys, and Grier's been there as a scout, but he's not been pulling the reins. But if you look at what he's done, Tyreek Hill has been with the Dolphins 2 years. Big trade. The Dolphins got him. He's already 11th in team history in receiving yards in 2 years.
And for what it's worth,
yeah, I mean that Chris Grier made that deal happen. So
I'm sure that. By the way, the Tyreek Hill discussion is something I have to have a debate with Ron Caniff about later on. So we'll look forward to that. So we're going to go ahead and call this show here. Everybody, thank you all so much for listening. Once again, we really appreciate everybody's comments and kind of giving us more stuff to talk about. You guys are the Pulse of Fins Nation, and we are always glad to have you. So that's going to be it for here. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention it before, but I need to make sure that I do. If you don't want to have to deal with the Twitter stuff that I end up starting firestorms over, what you can do is you can go check out the firestorms in OnlyFins. But at least in OnlyFins, you have good moderators who can keep everything under control. So OnlyFins, only $3 a month. The Discord link is in the link of the description in this YouTube video. And I know, Alf, I haven't memorized it yet. I memorized Bible verses when I was a kid. Like, it was nothing. I can't even remember little stuff now. So you got the link off the top of your head.
Well, this is my Bible verse. It's discord.gg/OnlyFins. And you could join over 2,100 fellow members and almost 200 in vetted for just $3 a month. And vetted is $25 a month. But You could all join us there. You have access to us at all times. By the way, Lewis is he's comped at Vetted.
It's a 5 reasons perk, I guess. So everybody, once again, thank you all so much for listening. This show is going to be on the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast feed very soon, and we will see you all next week. There's only 2 more weeks until the draft, guys. And on the 23rd, we are going to be doing our annual mock draft. That show's going to be really long because we're going to go through the whole kit and caboodle. Are you calling timeout, Duke? What's up?
I assume that you're doing a live feed during the draft like last year?
Yes, we will be doing that as well.
All right.
So that's how you got in here, Duke. You came to my rescue last year during the draft because nobody else was around, and suddenly Duke is available for all 5 reasons Dolphin stuff.
Now everybody gets the glorious beard all the time.
Yeah, well, it wasn't that glorious at the beginning. It's slowly becoming this incredible Ryan Fitzpatrick-esque glory.
Fitz magic, yeah.
And Hussam, wants to mention, don't forget the scouting combine. Actually, he did a first-round mock draft as well, and Hussam is going to be doing other content on the 5 Reasons Sports Network as well. Lots of content to go around with Dolphin stuff, folks. I get that the Miami Heat are the focus right now, but don't forget these Dolphins. They're here, and they're coming. So that's going to be it. We will see you all next time for another episode of Pulse of Fins Nation.